All right, let's jump right in. We're tackling a huge question today, one that's popping up all over the world. How in the world do you apply old rules to brand new technology? We're going to be diving into a policy paper from INATBA that does a fantastic job of breaking this whole dilemma down.
So to really get to the heart of this, let's start with a simple idea. Picture this. You and a few friends decide to buy an apartment together. It's just real estate, right? Simple. But what if, instead of a paper contract, you use a digital token to show who owns what? Does that one little tech change suddenly, magically, turn your home into a financial security, like a stock? Well, that's the exact puzzle we're going to unpack.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll lay out the big dilemma. Then we'll look at why a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work. We'll get into the messy consequences of that. Then pivot to what the paper says is a much smarter way forward. And finally, we'll talk about why this whole debate is just so important for our digital future.
Okay, let's set the stage. Right now, all around the globe, regulators are kind of scrambling. They're trying to figure out what to do with this explosion of new digital assets. The problem? The main tool they're using is a rulebook that was written for a totally different time.
And this brings us to what the paper identifies as the main issue. The go-to move, the default setting, has been to take these old financial regulations, rules made for banks and stock exchanges, and just kind of slap them on top of this entire new digital world. And as you can imagine, that's causing some serious problems.
You know that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail? Well, the paper argues that's exactly what's happening right now with digital regulation, and it's a really flawed way of looking at this new landscape.
In fact, the paper gives this problem a name: regulatory conflation. It's basically this big, problematic trend of treating every single digital asset and protocol as if it's just another stock or bond. This completely ignores what these things actually do and what they're for.
Let's circle back to our apartment example, because it makes this so clear. In the normal world, co-owning a place is all about real estate law. Now, if you use a token to represent that ownership, have you fundamentally changed the asset itself? The paper says absolutely not. The tech is just a digital wrapper. What's underneath is still just real estate.
And look, this is the core of the argument, straight from the paper itself. Tokenization is just a way of representing something digitally. Think of it like a digital deed. It doesn't magically turn a house or a piece of art into a complex financial product.
And this is where you can really see why the old rules just don't fit. They were built for a world of centralized companies. Banks with a CEO, a main office, someone you can call. This new world is often decentralized. It's run by code, there's no single person in charge, and the assets do all sorts of things that old-school financial products never could, like letting you vote or giving you access to a service.
So what happens when you try to jam that square peg into a round hole? Well, this is where the theory gets messy and turns into a real-world nightmare with some serious consequences for innovation and even for user safety.
This quote from the paper just puts it so bluntly. It says the way we're doing things now is basically trying to regulate a piece of software as if it were a giant bank. It's a complete mismatch, and that creates a whole host of problems.
Which, of course, leads to the million-dollar question. If you're using rules that demand a central company to be responsible for things, but the whole system is built to not have a central company, who exactly is supposed to be in charge of compliance?
It just gets completely murky. Are you supposed to hold the original developers responsible, even if they walked away years ago? What about the people providing liquidity to the market? Or maybe the people who use it the most? Or do you somehow try to hold the software protocol itself accountable? It's a technical and legal puzzle with no easy answer.
And the fallout from all this confusion is pretty serious. The paper warns that this whole approach puts a chill on innovation. Who wants to build cool new things in a legal gray zone? And the real irony? Instead of making things safer, it can actually push people into completely unregulated, shadow spaces just to avoid all the mess. Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But the paper doesn't just point out what's wrong. It actually proposes a solution. So let's get into the recommendations for a much smarter path forward.
This really lays it all out. You've got the old way, the one-size-fits-all model that only looks at the technology and just assumes everything is a financial product. But then there's the proposed right tool for the job model. This approach is way smarter. It focuses on what an asset actually does, its economic function, and the real risks it creates. The outcome? You go from these heavy, clunky rules to something that's proportional and precise. So the paper solution really boils down to three big ideas. First, functional classification.
Judge a token by what it does, not by the tech it uses. Second, a risk-based approach. This means a tiny project shouldn't have the same regulatory burden as a massive global exchange. And third, and this one is so important, control-based proportionality. The rules should be based on how much control someone actually has over the system.
So, what does control actually mean here? Well, the paper defines it really clearly. It says control can come from 3 different places: economic influence, like owning a huge chunk of the tokens; governance rights, meaning you have significant voting power; and access rights, which is the technical ability to actually go in and change the code of the protocol. This gives regulators something concrete to look for.
All right, let's zoom all the way out for a minute, because this might sound like a really technical, niche debate. But the implications of getting this right or wrong are absolutely massive for the future of our entire economy.
You know, this isn't really just about digital assets or crypto. It's a challenge we're going to face over and over again, with things like AI, biotech, and whatever else is coming down the pike. The ideas here, focusing on function, on risk, on control, they're really a blueprint for how we can adapt our laws to encourage innovation, not kill it in the crib.
And in the end, the paper's main message is this: if we truly want safety and transparency, we need regulations that are smart. They have to be based on how the technology actually works, they have to be focused on real-world risks, and they have to be proportional to the power that people actually have.
And that really leaves us with one final big question. The decisions we're making right now about how to handle this new digital world, they aren't just small technical tweaks. They're the foundational choices that are going to define our economy for generations. So the question we all have to ask is, are we choosing the right path?